Hey folks, today we are going to make a coin toss game in JavaScript by using the vanilla JavaScript. This is going to be a pretty application where we are going to select heads or tails. At the same time, computer is also going to select heads or tails. And based on that, points will be allotted to each player. The first player who makes it to the 5 points wins the game. This is a pretty simple application where we are using a little bit of JavaScript with HTML and CSS to make it more interactive, and it's gonna be a fun project. So let's go ahead and build this. Let's first create a folder called CoinToss. Inside this we are going to create an HTML file called index.html. Let's go ahead and add the boilerplate code to it. Next, let's add a reference to CSS style. We will add a CSS file here, and at the very bottom we are going to add reference to our JavaScript file, which we will be calling index.js for simplicity. Now let's head over to our HTML file and start creating our page. But before that, let me go ahead and Google the images of coins, and let me copy them from there and paste it in the project folder. So let me paste it here. So this is the American coin which we'll be using with heads and tails for 1 cent. And let's go back to our index.html. Here the HTML is gonna be very simple. I'm going to create a div with the ID of canvas. Inside this, let's put a heading. We'll call it first player to 5 points wins. Next, we'll create another div with ID selection. In this, I will say player selected. Let's put a colon there, and we'll put a span with ID. Let's call it this ID as player selection, and let's create another div for computer. So we'll call this again, instead of calling it, let's call this class. And the class we are going to add, let's add a class called selection to it, and I'll do the same thing to the above div as well. And to this I will say it's computer selected. And let's put colon, and let me put a span with ID computer selected or selection. And the next thing we want to do is we want to create a space where we will show the winner and the image, whether it's a computer or the person who's playing it. So let me add the ID of center. Inside this, we'll again create a div with ID winner. Yeah, that's it, I think. And let's create another div with ID image. And the next line, let's create another div inside which we're going to put player call this player, and let's put another span with id player score. So here we are going to keep track of the score for computer and the player who is playing, and we'll keep updating it as the game progresses. So let's give it computer, and let's update this label to computer, and we'll call this computer score. And let's go ahead and create another div. In this I'll give a h2 heading, and I'll say make a selection, and here we will provide the user with two options to select the heads or tails. So let me create one button with id heads. Similarly, we'll create another button with the id tails, and we'll call it heads and tails. Let's go ahead and add our app.js, or in this case, let's go ahead and add our index.js file. In our index.js file, we will be creating a const for buttons, for which we'll be grabbing the, we'll be using our query selector all, and we'll be grabbing each button from our application. Let's create a couple of variables to store the heads and tail values. So let heads is 1 and the tails is 0. Let user score, we're gonna set it to 0 by default, and the computer score would also be the 0 at the beginning. Let's create a function which will display the selection. So I'll define a function called display selections, and this will take user and computer as parameters. We'll define a constant called player selection, which will fetch the value of field called player selection. Similarly, we will do for computer as well, and we'll call this computer selection. If user is selecting heads, then we want to go ahead and do player selection dot style dot color, and we are going to set it to green. Similarly, if user has selected tails, then we want to set the value of player selections style to blue. Same we will do for computer. So let me grab this piece piece of code and modify it accordingly. So it's computer selected head and computer selected tail. So we'll be doing the same thing for computer selection. And the next thing we want to do is we'll select the player selection and we'll use its inner HTML property and we'll be setting it to the value which is provided in the user input. Same would be for computer selection as well. Now we'll create a function which we will call display random, and it will take a value called random which we'll be providing later on. Let's define a constant called display result, and this will take the reference of the image div which we have on the HTML. Let's go ahead and console log the value of random for now. So next we'll check if the value of random is equals to 1. We would like to go ahead and select the display result and change the background image. Similarly, if it's not equals to 1, we would like to set it for tails. Now we are done with display random function as well. Let's go ahead and create another function which we'll use to tally the score and decide the winner. So let me create a function called tally score, and this will take 3 parameters. One is random, next is user pick, and the third one will be computer pick. So let's go ahead and create a couple of constants to read the value of player computer fields, and also we'll grab the reference to the winner div. So let's create a const player display, and this we are gonna grab using a query selector, and we know the div has the ID of player score. Similarly, we are gonna do same stuff for computer display, and here instead of player score we will be saying computer score, and the last one would be winner, and we'll be grabbing it by using the winner ID. Now we do have like access to all the 3 divs we want to work with. So let's go ahead and check if what user has selected. If what user has picked is equals to the random value which we are getting, then user has won. So we are going to increase the user's score by 1. Same goes for computer as well. So if computer picks the correct random, then the computer score needs to be increased. In that case, we will just take player display and we'll add text content, and we would like to set that text content to user score. Similarly, we want to set the computer score as well on the computer display. Now that's that. Next, we want to make sure that we are able to decide the winner. So let's go ahead and check if the user score is equals to 5 and the computer score is also equals to 5. That means it's a tie. So let's put the inner HTML of winner div to be we'll call it a tie. Else, if the user score is equals to 5 but the computer score is not, so then we want to set the value of the winner div to you win, notifying the user that he has won. Else, if computer score is 5, then we would say computer won. Computer wins. So now we have our tally score function also in place. So let's go ahead and write our final function in which we'll be using all these three functions to make our application work. Let's go ahead and grab the buttons which we created at the very beginning, and we'll use the for each function to iterate through all the buttons and call the functions on them. So let's go ahead and add an event listener to the button, and the event listener we are looking for is click, and let's add an anonymous function here where we would like to create a constant called random to generate the random number. We are going to create a random number and we would like to round it so that we will get either 0 or 1. That way our heads and tails will come up. The next thing we want to do is create another constant where we will say computer pick, and now this needs to be a simple AI, so we will again take the help from math and we will use the randomizer from math to generate the pick for computer. Next, let's create a variable called computer selection, and in this we will define what computer is going to select. So let's say if computer pick is equals to 1, that means computer is going to pick. So the computer selection should be heads. Else computer selection needs to be tails. Next thing we want to do is we want to spin the coin. So let's create a constant to spin, and we'll grab the reference to the image field where we want to show the coin spinning. Let's take the reference and add the class list of animate to it. Next, we want to record the user's selection. So for that, I'll create another constant called user selection, which will be the target ID. Let's create another variable called user pick. This we will set based on what user has selected. If user has selected heads, then the user pick is gonna be 1. Else, if user selection is tails, then user pick is gonna be 0. Now the next thing we want to do is call the display selection by sending the user selection and the computer selection in it, and then we'll call the display random function. So let's call display selection, and in this we have to put user and computer selection. So let's add that. Next, we'll call display random, and inside this we'll be passing our random value. Finally, we'll add a set timeout method in which I'll add a function this timeout method is gonna call the tally score with random, user pick, and the computer's pick. And we will be resetting the animation. So let's go ahead and set that. So we'll stop the animation there, and let me go ahead and add 2 seconds of delay so that it takes some time to calculate the score and then defines whether who wins or who doesn't win. So go ahead and save this. We'll go to style.css and we'll add a couple of styles to it so that it looks good. So we have added styles to the canvas class, the center tag, the selection classes, the buttons, and the animate class, which we are adding and removing. So let's go ahead and save this. So let's go ahead and see this in action. Looks like the style is a bit off, so let's fix that. Okay, so I've defined this as ID, but in the styles I've defined canvas as a class. So let's go ahead and put this as ID and save this. Let's reload our page. Now this looks better, so let's adjust so that we can see it. And let's go ahead and click on heads. So as I selected heads, since I selected heads, it is showing this as green, and computer selected tails, so it is showing as blue. And the outcome was tails, so computer won and I made a score of 0. Let's go ahead and select heads again. So this time it's heads and we won. So you can say this was like a fun project to make. If you really did enjoy watching this video, please go ahead and make this project and let me know, did you really enjoy working on this one or not. And if you like the video, please go ahead and like the video and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next video.